Hi, today I'm going to be speaking a little bit about how my civic engagement experience was affected by things I learned in the classroom and how those things carried over to things that I noticed when I was actually working with the community that I chose. Obviously, I chose the deaf community. I have been working with them for a handful of semesters. I volunteer for them a lot. I socialize with them a lot. And I plan on being an ASL interpreter, so one day I will work with them. And I really learned a lot in past semesters, but also this semester, and was able to notice things that I may have learned about in the classroom, but how they actually pertain to my real life. So, specifically, just cultural idiosyncrasies. So, specifically, like how people introduce themselves in the deaf community versus the hearing community, and how they identify with the world around them, and how they are very blunt in the deaf community versus the hearing community, which is more, they try to, beat around the bush a little bit more. Specifically, we met many deaf people who shared their stories with us one day in class. And, these stories ranged from all different sorts of things, but it was pretty obvious that oftentimes these stories came from a place of just explaining their deafness and their story of either becoming deaf or what their life has looked like as a deaf individual. And it was just really interesting to see how those things that I had learned in class actually did pertain to these people. And also, just out in the real world, oftentimes, if I go to a deaf community activity and I'm talking to somebody, they will ask me questions about how I got into ASL and anybody I know in the community, trying to, figure out my network and also figure out just how I came to be here. And I think that's really interesting and really important. Secondly, I'm going to discuss what are underlying systems that maintain the problem and power dynamics between the deaf community and people that can hear. Specifically, I had two events that happened this semester that I noticed and that I attended that really apply to this question. So, first of all, there was one day where we found out that the Utah state government was going to be taking away funding from the Utah schools for the deaf and blind, which was really going to affect their high school, which they would have to shut down if they did not get this funding. We had found out the day before they were going to make me pass this. And so all of us, being a lot of interpreters and some people in my class, decided to go and show up and show that we do care about this and that it is important to us if that we get this funding, truly. And I showed up at the Utah State Capitol, and it was just a really good experience to show that we care and that we are willing to stand up for what's right and to make sure that we get the funding that they needed to continue having the high school. Specifically, a lot of parents of children that go to USDB were there, a lot of interpreters, a lot of interpreting students. And it was just interesting to see the dynamic of people that are newer to the community and people that are pros, have been in the community forever, or are, deeply ingrained in the deaf community. Those people, it was just interesting to see how the dynamic between them worked. But it was a really beautiful experience, honestly. And it made them push back deciding on that. So hopefully they keep that money for the Utah Schools for the Deaf and Blind. Secondly, there is a theater company up in Ogden called the Ziegfeld, and they every year do a show where they incorporate ASL. Typically, this means that they'll have two people playing one character, and one will be doing ASL and one will be doing the singing or speaking lines. And this is a really important, just a really important show for people that are in the deaf community and also people who are not, to see how beautiful ASL is and how the deaf community can come together to create art like this, and that they can be involved in theater, because I think a lot of people truly believe that they can't be involved in theater or singing or dancing or whatever. So it's just a really beautiful thing. And the Ziegfeld had, unfortunately, said that they were not going to do those shows going forward, at least for a handful of years. And a lot of the deaf community were obviously unhappy with this decision. And I found out about it. I already had tickets to go see the show, but it was a very different experience going and realizing how important that experience was to the deaf community, and also to people who are outside of it, like me, who's trying to get in, or even, again, people that are fully hearing and not part of the deaf community. It was just a really important experience. So thank you.